Hello and welcome to episode 14 of the Wisdom from the Akasha podcast. My name is Susie. I am an Akashic Records teacher and practitioner. Today I am going to be talking all things walk-in souls. So if this is a topic that you may have heard about, you're interested in, you want to know a little bit more about, hang around. Before that, I just want to mention that this month in the membership, I am going to be covering the solar plexus chakra. This chakra is extremely important for those of you who are clairsentient, or if you aren't aware of that and you just consider yourself an empath. This membership session is going to be really important because clairsentience itself is very connected to that solar plexus chakra. And the solar plexus chakra is one that often is neglected in the spiritual community because of its association with ego. If you are listening to this after May 2024 and you want to still be able to see that episode of the members only live, don't panic. All membership recordings are uploaded into the members area. All previously held workshops are in that members area, and there's some PDFs as well to help you work with various different things. If you're listening to this in June or July, it will be there in the members area available, but it is a really important topic for those of you who are clairsentient or consider yourself an empath. In June, July, and August in the membership, we're going to be focusing specifically on the astral realm. If you like to do deep dives into esoteric teachings, if you want to understand this realm better, if you've maybe had experience with lower astral energies and you want to really understand that, then that's definitely for you as well. If you want to sign up to the membership, all that you have to do is go over to the appointments page and click the members only live. When you sign up for the members only live for whichever month you're listening to this, you will then receive an email which has the passcode for you to access the members area, and then all of the previous recordings are in there. So you'll be registered for the next live session and you will be given access to the members area. The membership is currently open. You can join whenever you want and you can leave whenever you want. There is no restriction on timing. My purpose behind setting the membership up was very much to give me a place to talk about things in depth with those of you who are interested in these topics, and also to provide a place where I can offer support for you whilst you're on your spiritual journey, because I know it can be a little bit chaotic, it can be a little bit confusing, and having someone there once a month that you can check in with, that you can talk about things that you're experiencing and maybe understand what's going on with yourself, people have found really helpful. So I wanted to offer this as a resource for everybody. Now that all of that is out of the way, let's get into today's topic, which is the topic of walk-in souls. This is a big topic. It's definitely becoming more popular. And I definitely get more questions from people on social media now than I did when I first started doing social media. I want to really do a deep dive and I want to answer some of the most commonly asked questions that I get around this topic. There's two types of walk-ins that we're going to discuss. We're going to talk about the mechanics of these things and also, of course, what walk-ins are not. So let's get into it. The first thing to note is that walk-ins are not the same thing as possession. In a walk-in situation, there is an agreement between the two souls, the soul who is walking out and the soul who is walking in. This is not the same thing as a possession, and possession is a whole different topic that maybe I'll cover another day in the podcast. But for now, what we need to understand is that a walk-in situation is a situation where there is free will and where there is consent on both parties. So now that we have covered what a walk-in is not, it's not the same thing as possession. Let's look at what a walk-in is. So there are two different types of walk-ins that show up in the Akashic Records. I am not saying that there may not be other types of walk-in situations, but these are the two that come up most commonly in the Akashic Records when I'm reading for other people. The first type is the rarest type, and this is the complete walk out and walk in. It's a soul swap situation. They are more common now than they ever have been. People are becoming more aware of this concept, and people are realizing that they themselves may have had a walk-in, but they are still very rare in terms of the amount of the human population that have experienced this. There is also a walk-in type that is a more common walk-in type, which is referred to in the Akashic Records as a higher self walk-in. So first I'm going to go through the mechanics of the rarest type, the true walk-in situation, and then we will go into the higher self walk-in. Then we'll go into the signs and symptoms of perhaps you've experienced this so that you can recognize it within yourself. And hopefully, for those of you who have experienced this, it may answer some of those questions that you have around certain circumstances, around things that have happened in your life. As I mentioned at the start, a walk in and the soul walking out, there is this consent. So, how is this given? Most times, when there is a walk in, walk out situation, a full soul swap situation, there is an agreement between the two souls prior to the incarnation. This is one of those contracts that would be made prior to even coming into physical incarnation in what we call in the Akashic Records the transition zone. So, where the soul will go in between lifetimes. And oftentimes it's a soul that the other soul is familiar with. The walk in and the walk out souls tend to know each other. They may be from the same soul group, but they do tend to know each other prior to one of the souls incarnating. Now, that isn't always the case. Sometimes this happens whilst the soul is incarnate. But what we have to always remember is there is only a fractal of your soul in your physical body. Most of your soul essence is what you would refer to as the higher self. And in the cases where it hasn't been pre agreed before the incarnation, the higher self is still able to negotiate the terms of a walk in without your knowledge. This, I know, sounds crazy, like your soul is off doing things without your knowledge, but we always have to remember that there is much more of our self, of our soul, of our essence outside of physical incarnation than there is inside physical incarnation. However, it's decided whether it's a pre incarnation agreement or a during the incarnation agreement, there is an agreement between the soul that is leaving the incarnation and the soul that is coming into the incarnation. And there are a number of reasons why this agreement would be made. What we have to remember is an earthly incarnation is an extremely useful thing for a soul who is looking to evolve. And what all souls have prior to coming into the incarnation is they have a variety of what's called exit points. These are occasions when the soul can choose to leave the physical incarnation if it so chooses. The soul has free will whether or not to exercise that exit point. Now, because of the fact that human incarnation is so very valuable to the soul, in the instance where there is the possibility for the physical vehicle to continue to be used by another soul, this is where you have the opportunity for a walk out and a walk in. It usually happens where you have a younger soul. And when I say younger, I mean less experienced soul who takes on a lot of really difficult stuff prior to coming into the incarnation. They will pick very difficult family situations, very difficult life lessons, overburden themselves, and it can just get to a point in the incarnation where they realize essentially that maybe they've taken on a little bit more than they can chew. The incoming soul, the walking in soul, tends to be an older soul, so a more experienced soul who maybe doesn't need to have the earlier part of the incarnation, but can still make use of the physical vehicle for something that it wants to achieve in its own evolution. So it's essentially the younger soul prior to coming into the incarnation saying, hey, look, I'm going to put a couple of exit points into this. If I choose to leave the physical incarnation at that time, do you want to use the physical vehicle? And this is where that contract forms. As I said earlier, this can sometimes be done whilst the physical incarnation is ongoing. Most of the time, it's done prior to the incarnation happening. And of course, the walking in soul says, yes, that would be great. I have certain things that I want to experience. I could definitely use that. So if you do choose to do the exit point, then I will take that opportunity to walk in essentially. So this is where you have this complete soul swap. It's a higher self of the incarnated soul and another soul, so another higher self that hasn't incarnated, swapping over. For this process to take place, most of the time, although again, not all the time, there does tend to be this exit point that comes up, a period of extreme illness, an accident that leads to somebody going into a coma. These are the most common times that you're going to see a full soul swap, a full walk-in occur. There tends to be a big dramatic event that can happen that gives the opportunity for this process to take place. It isn't always the case. There are complete soul swaps that have taken place overnight. So if you haven't experienced this very traumatic event, but you still feel that a walk-in may describe what you have experienced, please don't think for one instance that I'm saying that that's not possible. It is. Anything is possible with the soul, and what I'm doing here is just generalizing the normal situations where this happens. So there is this traumatic event, this long period of unconsciousness usually happens. And this is the opportunity where one soul leaves and one soul walks in. Oftentimes people will say, okay, but how does the walking in soul have the memories when there's been a walk-in situation? And there's this really cool process that the Akashic Records explained to me, essentially about memory download. So what happens is the outgoing soul, the walk out, takes with them their light grid. So their 7 energy bodies, it takes that with them. Any energetic stagnation that has arisen in that incarnation goes with them for their next physical incarnation. The walking in soul brings their light grid with them. Now, there is then this process of the memories of the walking out soul essentially being downloaded into the light grid of the walking in soul. Whilst the walking in soul will have the memories and the understanding of what that human being has been through, they don't have the energetic stagnation in the light grid that is caused by this. And this explains why when there is this walk in, walk out situation going on, the people closest to the individual will notice little differences. They will notice that the person has changed in some way. And a lot of the time, it's because there's been this swap over of the light grid. So energetically, they are different after the walk in has come in. And I'll get into that a little bit more when we look at the kind of signs and symptoms of this. But there's this beautiful process where the soul memory is downloaded, but the energetic stagnation is not. So that's the full soul swap, walk in, walk out situation, the rarest type, but the most obvious to spot usually. And most of the time, if somebody has experienced this and they are a walk in and they come for an Akashic Records reading, most of the time they know that they are a walk-in or they have an inkling that they are a walk-in. So when they ask the Akashic Records about this and they get the information, it gives them that confirmation. But they do tend to have this inkling anyway about this situation having taken place. The more common type of walk-in, which I know lots of you listening will have experienced at some point in your life, is when there is a higher self walk-in. Let me explain. As I said at the start of this, only a fractal of your soul comes into physical incarnation. That fractal of your soul is what we refer to in the Akashic Records as the light grid. So those 7 energy bodies, but there's only ever percentage of the soul that experiences the physical incarnation. You may remember in the episode about soul contracts and soulmates and twin flames, we talked a little bit about that there as well. So there is only ever a portion of the soul that is associated with the physical incarnation. The rest is what you would refer to as the higher self or the soul. And the higher self, the soul, exists across multiple dimensions. So, depending upon which aspect of your higher self you're communicating with, will depend upon how your higher self will appear to you. In the case where we have a higher self walk in, what has taken place technically here is this often happens after somebody has undergone a long period of healing. Lots of you will have experienced this after a dark night of the soul. If you've spent time healing your inner child, doing your shadow work, really integrating lessons that have happened. What can happen is the process of doing that healing work, what you're doing from the Akashic perspective is you're clearing out this light grid. Anything that you have experienced shows up as energetic stagnation, so essentially a blockage in the light grid until it is healed, until it is transmuted. And when you're doing your healing work, what you're doing is you're moving through this energetic stagnation to make your light grid as clear as possible. When we look at Akashic clearing, what we're doing there is we're going even further out into the outer layers of the light grid to move the energetic stagnation caused by things like past life trauma, ancestral issues, karmic connections, and so on. But the work that you do on yourself is doing work on usually the first 3 layers of the light grid: the mental body, the emotional body, and the etheric body. By doing this work upon yourself, what you're doing is you're making space in your light grid. And the more space that you make in your light grid, the more of your soul that can come into physical incarnation. So you may have started your incarnation with 5% of your soul fractal being physically incarnated. And as you've cleared out your light grid, you may have increased your capacity to 15%. And if a large portion of the higher self comes into the light grid, so that percentage of the fractal becomes bigger, that is what we refer to as a higher self walk-in. And these are much more common, especially amongst those people who are dedicated to their spiritual journey and their spiritual development. The signs and symptoms of having a walk-in are very similar between those who have had a higher self walk-in and those who have done a full soul swap. And I have seen people in the Akashic Records who have actually experienced both. So they've experienced the full walk-in and they've experienced their higher self walk-in. I've seen people who have experienced a number of higher self walk-ins. This obviously is very individual and unique, but the signs and symptoms tend to be the same for everybody. So let's get into those. The most obvious sign of a walk-in, whether it's the full soul swap or a higher self walk-in, is the changes in the individual. And these changes tend to be noticed by those closest to them. There does tend to be dramatic life changes that come along with a walk-in situation. You may have a complete diet change. You may completely change your hobbies, your interests. You may become much more spiritually dedicated. There can be lots of things, but these changes tend to be noticed mostly by the people closest to those who've experienced a walk-in will say, they've just changed. It feels like they've changed overnight. There does tend to be this shift that happens very quickly. There does also tend to be a period of memory loss, and we have to be quite careful with this one because memory loss can also be a sign of soul fragmentation that's occurred, which I'll cover in another podcast episode. But here, what happens is even though whether it's the soul walking in that's downloaded the memories or just a higher self walk-in happening, the energetic stagnation that was there in the light grid originally that was causing these painful memories to come up and regurgitate has gone. So what happens is, whilst there might be a memory of an event happening, there isn't the emotional charge behind it because that stagnation has been transmuted and there's just a remnant of the memory. there tends to be this period of memory loss or this memory that you think you should have. You think that I should have more of a memory of this, and it just tends to be quite a vague memory. We have these changes, and it could be changes in diet, changes in interest, changes in hobbies, big life changes. You may change your job, you may take decisions that, people around you think, God, they never would have taken those types of risks, those made those changes. And also what can happen is your intuition becomes much stronger. You may become aware of psychic abilities that you didn't have previously. And this can be, I wake up the following day and I have these new abilities. So it can be quite unsettling when this happens. Of course, as always, we want grounding, we want embodiment to ensure that if these changes have occurred, that we're planting them into physical reality, we're staying in the physical reality. But it is very normal for these new gifts to come online, for the intuition to become much stronger, because again, the light grid has changed and it can change quite significantly, quite dramatically in a very short space of time. And as it does that, what can happen is it can activate past life gifts and skills, past life abilities, initiations that you've experienced where you have developed certain abilities. And by moving that energetic stagnation that was essentially blocking your access to those abilities, these new abilities will come online stronger. It's not that they're new abilities. Most of the time, these have been developed in previous incarnations, but they will feel new because you didn't have access to them previously. If you have experienced, especially if you've experienced a higher self walk in, don't be surprised if you experience more than one of these on your spiritual development journey. It's very, very normal. It's a very normal part of the process of spiritual development. So I hope that this episode has helped some of you understand what these terms mean and also feel into whether or not this may apply to you. Of course, if this is something that you have experienced, embrace it. You're taking in more of your higher self, or there is a reason that your soul has chosen to do this. What we must remember is the purpose of the walk ins occurring is to make use of the physical incarnation, to allow the soul to align to its highest timeline, which of course is what the Akashic Records are all about. I hope that you have enjoyed this episode. I look forward to seeing those of you who are attending the free workshop on Sunday, and everybody else, I look forward to seeing you next week.